supporting team, and you need a cross-functional team, which we'll talk about as well, but this is the crux of a product management role versus a product management process. It's important to keep that distinction when you communicate, and it depends on the context of your communication. So let's take a look at maybe more crisper definition. Now that we understand the product management process or the productizing process, what is the role of a product manager? So the one-line definition and there are many such definitions out there. So certainly this is not the only one. This is the one that we believe is the more true reflection of reality in today's world, which is, finding compelling. And compelling because at the end of the day, you have to pick those problems to solve. You have to build those products that actually have a real problem, a real need that somebody's willing to pay for, somebody's willing to adopt, somebody's willing to use. So that's the compelling part. So finding compelling, competitive, and profitable solutions to market problems. The key word here is market problems and not customer problems. And this is one caution that I would like to talk about, especially those who are in the role of business analysts or project managers. We often get caught into one customer requirement or few customer requirements. And so it depends on your industry. There's always an exception, but more often than not, that's a dangerous thing to do when you're building a product. That model works great for services, where you have to please each individual customer individually. And because they're perhaps a big paying customer, you might not have a choice but to go listen to that and kind of do what they want. But that's still a more service way of doing things. A product way of doing things is figuring out what does the broad market want. Because that's where the non-linear scale comes in. That's where you can make the same software, burn the CD for 10 cents and charge $1 million for it to the next big customer, right? That's the scale that comes in if you're building a true product. So market problems are very important as opposed to customer problems. So make that distinction in your mind as well as you play the role or as you aspire to get in one of these product management roles. And at the end of the day, all of your solutions could be solving real problems, but at the end of the day, they have to deliver delight. Especially in today's world, customers' bar is very high. Every time there's an innovative product, the bar goes high in the customer's mind. So you have to really delight that end customer with whatever solution you are designing or delivering. And that's the role of a product manager. So let me pause and take a few questions to see if, oh, wow, we have a big roster already. Okay, so Satyam is talking about, what kind of educational background do you need? So I'll cover that technical side versus the management side. I think Vijay Balkwade is asking about career path. Okay, so we'll get to those questions in a little bit as well. Okay, great. So that's the definition of the product manager. Now, what does the product manager generally entail in terms of a day-to-day life, right? So I'm trying to give you a ground reality of how their world should work or should operate. 50% of the time, generally speaking, we want our product managers to be facing with the customer, understanding the market, talking to prospects, interviewing people, looking at the segment of the customers you're trying to understand the problem, right? So that's the biggest lion's share of your time that needs to go to deal with and talk to and interact with the customers, the real market. The other two stakeholders or teams, if you will, from an interlock is one is internal, and engineering is usually your biggest stakeholder because you're working with them to define requirements, to give them the context of the requirements. If you're an agile, following an agile methodology, then you're obviously having product owners who sit in your Scrum meetings or your agile meetings and your stand-up meetings and kind of help them with the delivery on a weekly or on every iteration basis, right? So there's a lot more hand-holding happening. So engineering is definitely one of your most important stakeholders, but there's others as well in the company. Because remember, we looked at the productizing process, which means it's everything from understanding value, creating value, capturing value, communicating value, and then finally delivering value. So you can't just always be stuck at creating value. That's a myopic view. It's a very short-sighted view of product management to just focus on requirements, right? And that very well might be in your early stage of your career path. There's nothing wrong with it. but your horizons need to be widened from there. You obviously have external stakeholders beyond customers, and these are your partners, your analysts, your channels, your suppliers. Depending on which industry you're in, sometimes suppliers take up bulk of your time because most of your components that you're using to deliver your product might be outsourced, might be coming from somewhere else. So it's a very important stakeholder for you to focus on. So this is what a typical interlock looks like for a product management role. Now, if you look at it, there's a lot of questions to consider. And some of these terms are kind of marketing terms, product management, business terms that you might have been exposed to. Others you might not have been exposed to, but I bet you will be eventually in your career path. Irrespective whether you're a product manager or not. You might be an engineering manager. As long as you're in a product company, you'll probably be exposed to some of this, right? So what's my market size? How big is the market? Should I acquire this component or should I build this with my engineering team? What's the timing? Is the innovation that we're trying to build too early, too ahead of its time? And we've seen even companies like Google have failed with several of their launches just because they could not figure out the right timing. It's not always predictable. The most important thing here, though, is can I monetize it, right? That's the core part. Unless you're a non-profit organization, at the end of the day, a product manager is a business leader. At the end of the day, a product manager is a CEO of the product, and so you need to figure out how to make money, how to monetize that, right? Now, here is another structured way of looking at this. While there are a lot of questions, and this is obviously not enough time for us to go in the details to that level, but I wanted to point out maybe 5 core areas. And this is a nice way to, in our opinion, look at product management from a structure perspective. So first area is market analysis. You do a bunch of things in this phase where the key question you're trying to answer is choosing to build. Means, while all these ideas that engineers have come up with, that customers have come up with, that you've come up with, while they seem to be all great ideas, which of those do we want to choose to actually build a solution? It's a very important decision, the most important decision, in fact, in the productizing process. The second one is strategic planning. So you've chosen the idea. Now you have to figure out whether you can actually build a sustainable business around it. Can you develop a profitable business model? Not necessarily this year, maybe 2 years from now, maybe 7 years from now, but you got to have a business plan. So strategy, how big is the market, what's the model, all of that. The third part is product planning. And this is where a lot of requirements management, scenarios, user stories, user experience design, a lot of portfolio management. If you have multiple products in your organization, how do you make the investment bets? So you have 50 engineers and 3 products. How do you divide those engineers up? Right? That's not usually divide by 3. There's a sophisticated process and a lot of tools available like GE, McKinsey, like BCG, which allows you to figure out what's the way to optimize your spend to make the largest amount of revenue. The fourth one is go-to-market. Obviously, the launch plan, the marketing plan, positioning. How are you going to acquire the customers once you've built the product, and then finally, sales enablement. This is the channel development. If you have your virtual sales force, you have to work with the channel. If you have your direct sales force, how do you enable them to pitch the right way? How do you do thought leadership things so that you have a buzz in the industry? All of these 5 different areas is essentially what we call the ground reality of what a product manager really needs to focus on and develop enough skills to be able to practice that. Now, we obviously have other people involved, as I mentioned earlier, right? So you have everything from a product manager to what we call a marketing manager or sales manager. So we've given them names here just from the sake of easy to understand. You have project managers, so this is your coordinating Kevin. You have business analysts who are also involved in essentially working with the customer and understanding the context of that and trying to translate that into requirements. And then you obviously have the technology managers. Now there are many others in the product ecosystem in a cross-functional product team, but these are some of the characters that you will probably see a lot more in reality, right? And so it's very important to understand, and this goes back to some of the questions that you guys had asked as well, is what's the difference between a project manager and a product manager, a business analyst and a product manager. So I'll try to address some of those in the next 1 or 2 slides, and then maybe take a more detailed discussion if continued interest is still there. But typically these are different roles, and they coexist in an organization. So if you look at a typical development cycle, you obviously have an idea, you develop a plan, you get approvals on the plan, you start developing, you start testing, you start doing quality assurance on it, and then you kind of do launch and so on and so forth, right? So it's very straightforward, typical development plan. Now, across that development plan, if you interlay the productizing process that we talked about, this is how it would look like, right? So the productizing process with the 5 phases of what we just finished talking is very nicely overlaying with a development process, a construction process, an engineering process, right? So this graphic should hopefully give you a perspective on how the two work together. And here are some of the items or some of the tasks at a very high level. Obviously, you cannot summarize everything in one slide, but these are the most important things that kind of happen in each of these development phases. And if you look at the bottom, I've tried to highlight kind of best practices on how people interlock with each other. So in the conceive phase, you have product manager who's taking the lead, but you obviously have a business analyst as well helping with that. So everything from competitive analysis to feasibility analysis to understanding the problem, all of that kind of happens there. And so as you go and progress along, when you get into the development phase, that's where the project manager gets in. All right? So the product manager obviously is involved in this phase. But the product manager is more focused on making sure that the right requirements with the right business context, with the right customer context is being implemented. Whereas the project manager is spending more focus and is more laser focused and spending time on, are things happening with the cross-functional team? Are the dependencies being resolved? Is there a risk involved in the project, right? From a sheer coordination, from a sheer scheduling, from a sheer making sure that the train will actually deliver, arrive on time as we had planned originally, right? So that's kind of the crux or the focus of the project manager. And then as you kind of go along, there are different interactions between these roles. Now, in smaller organizations, you don't have these different roles. So it's quite normal and it's quite okay to have a project manager who's also playing the role of a product manager. Just because it's a small organization, or maybe they didn't have that much of a budget to hire 2 different guys. And so that happens quite a bit as well, which is why I kept on saying focus on the product management role from a context of our discussion, not the title. Because you might have a different title, but you might still be doing product management as long as it fits the structure that we're discussing here. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of perspective on how the different teams interlock with each other, right? Now, the question that I think a couple of you already asked, and I know some of you asked here as well. Vijay, Vijay asked that question. Satyam asked the question. A couple of you asked the question. So let me kind of walk through this in reality as kind of what we see. So we have a lot of business analysts. We have a lot of project managers. We also have this notion of associate product managers, which is a fancy way of saying junior product managers, but I guess the word junior is not very uplifting from a personal ego perspective. So we call it associate, but it pretty much means the same thing. And then you have technical product managers. Those are more technology focused, not so much business focused of the product cycle. So all of these roles and many other titles and many other roles, they all become the starting block for you to become a product manager. A product manager, when I say a product manager, is in a true sense going and orchestrating the entire productizing process, not just requirements management, but what happens before and after that, right? That's kind of the definition here of a product manager. And so this is where it goes, right? So you have senior, PM who becomes a senior PM. A senior PM at some point becomes a group PM, a director of PM. A director of PM turns into then a vice president of product management. and eventually a general manager, head of the business unit, or a CEO of the company, or CEO of the business unit, right? So that's kind of the typical career path. And again, time and time again, we've seen this happen across the world in a very predictable fashion. This is what happens. Now, the ground reality on India is a little bit different in the sense that the path is still remaining the same, but we haven't seen as much success stories yet to have a lot of vice presidents of product management. That's not a function of not having those career paths. It partly could be. I think it's more of a function of the maturity of the function itself and how long has the industry had these roles in reality for them to mature to that level, right? So, however, there are several vice presidents for product management in India that I've come across in the last 14 months that I've spent time in India, and so this is definitely happening and happening very fast, by the way, changing very fast here in India as well. Now, if you look at the functional difference across these roles, in the first bucket, the business analyst bucket, the project management bucket, PPM bucket, you are essentially owning a module of the product, right? And so when I say the module of the product, if I go back to the framework, the productizing process, if you will, it is one of these modules that we mean, right? So you might be in charge of the market analysis of how big the market is. You might be in charge of competitive analysis. You might be in charge of requirements management. That is one such module of the entire productizing process, right? And that's kind of what we mean by a module owner from a structure perspective as to what that role would do. So going back, the next one is you obviously own the features. You essentially own the roadmap. You essentially decide what's going to go in the next release and the release after, right? So you're making business decisions about the particular product, including the roadmap, right? So that's where a typical product management is different than a project manager or a business analyst, where they might not have the full authority to make the decision on what gets in. And what's considered what we call a minimally viable product, right? Or release 1, release 2, that's customer facing. As you go into a senior product manager, you're now getting into product P&L discussion, right? Pricing, packaging, elements of it, at least assisting in that, if not owning it fully. And as you go more mature, making business decisions, should we use this component from vendor 1 versus that component in vendor 2, and what is the financial ramifications of each one? So you get into the more P&L side, profit and loss, more financial analysis side. In a group PM, you also start making the distinction of what we call a product line owner. So you might have more than one related products or adjacent products that you're managing. As a director, you start getting into more portfolio. So you have an entire portfolio of products that you are potentially managing. Obviously, you have a whole business unit. In a large company, you have usually multiple business units. So you're now the head of that business unit, if you will. And obviously, then you become the CEO or the general manager. Now, if you look at so that's the career path that we see, and this is what we work with a lot of organizations. We've now done work with about 40 organizations, very large-scale organizations, MNCs, $1 billion of revenue or higher, as well as mid-size, funded startups in India. And this is the process we're trying to put together to standardize the role and the map of what they do from an HR perspective. So the other thing that's important when you look at career path is the people management side. And fortunately or unfortunately, people management is not a huge priority or a sign of seniority when it comes to product management. In fact, I know several product managers who were my peers at vice president level who decided that they did not want to have people management. Sorry, they did not want to have people management because at the end of the day, the fun is in managing products more so than managing people. And that's not a sign that they're any less senior than the guy who's managing people, right? So this is one thing that you have to unlearn from the Indian context. That just because you don't have people reporting to you, that doesn't mean that you are any less important, as long as you're making the right business decisions for the product. So people management usually gets introduced at a group or a director level, and then obviously you go all the way up, and when you become a GM, you have a cross-functional team. So you're managing technology guys, you're managing product managers, you're managing marketing managers, the whole cross-functional team. So this is how, I would characterize as the kind of career path that one should be looking at and mapping out their own processes to kind of where they are and where they probably need to